This has been going on the last day or two. By the way, to get the fan, the top of the outdoor unit, the fan off, you have to take this panel off right here. Okay, that panel comes off with 2 screws, and then you have to disconnect the fan from the capacitor, and there's 2 other spots where it gets connected. I actually ended up pulling the capacitor out completely just to be safe. Please be careful if you're doing this. Watch another YouTube video on how to change capacitors. They show you how to discharge them. These are very dangerous. If you touch some of the terminals at the same time, it can give you a real bad shock, potentially even send you to the hospital. So be very careful. Make sure you discharge the capacitor before you mess with it. And the first thing you always do before you even start messing with removing any screws is disconnect your system. There should be an equipment disconnect somewhere near it. It's not enough just to turn the system off. You're gonna actually wanna pull the disconnect out so that there's no way there's any power going to this system. Then you take off your cover, your panel, to disconnect the capacitor, or at least the wires to the fan, and then you can take it off and work on it. Okay, one last thing. Before you take all this stuff off, take a picture. Take a picture from multiple angles, just so you get everything going back in the right spot. The orange wire from this fan goes back here. That's the one wire from the fan you have to disconnect. The other wire is this black wire here, and that's on the circuit board. It's gonna be this guy right here. And then the purple wire on the capacitor. What I did too is I Sharpied which color wire went to each side of the capacitor. You can't see, I Sharpied them on the other side. By the way, you may be thinking, oh, well, that circuit board's blinking, it's got power. Well, it's likely just power from the low voltage system, or any kind of battery or small little capacitor it may have on that circuit board. I've actually already discharged this capacitor, and it's disconnected from the equipment disconnect as well. So take pictures, make sure you put everything back the way you found it, zip tie all the wires together. Refusing to pay to have a technician come out and start replacing parts, I decided to just take the top off myself and look at it. And I found something really interesting in that what's happened is the fan shroud housing is only bolted 4 places to the top. Okay, so you've got 4 screws. 1, 2, and 3 and 4 on the other side. Okay, that's these bolts right here, these guys. Okay, that's not a lot. And what I noticed was, if you look how it is right now, housing down here, it's actually not flush anymore or touching the surface. So what I did is watch, go back. Watch what happens if I just push on the opposing sides, the sides that aren't rubbing. See this? Okay, what I'm able to do is by squeezing the sides that aren't rubbing, is I actually get the shroud to seat itself again. So the real problem is that as it shrinks and contracts, it's causing the shroud to kind of warp and not be seated properly. And now that all I did was I pushed right here because it was rubbing here, and it's now seated here. Now look at my fan blade here. Look at the distances I have. No more rubbing. Okay, so again, if your system sounds like a machine gun when it's running like that, take this thing off, push the other direction on the shroud, and then now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some self-tapping screws What I'll probably do is just drill some holes, and where they've decided to only install 4 screws, I'm gonna install another 4, maybe even 6 or 8, and just make sure that this shroud housing can never become deformed, even as it shrinks. Okay, so what I decided to do was just put, so actually, if you look closely here, give me the camera. There's actually already another mounting hole for a screw. See, that's the one the factory uses, but there's a second one next to each screw. So they actually have 8 factory locations or factory screw mount locations on the fan shroud. So what I'm doing is I'm going to utilize those locations plus throw an extra one in between. And so you'll see here I already did one side. So this was the one from the factory. This one wasn't being used from the factory, so I threw a self-tapping screw in there, and then I, right here, drilled and put another self-tapping screw in. And I'm just using the typical, hex head, same ones as pretty much as the factory, except these probably have a little bit better corrosion resistance. Obviously you want to use like a stainless steel or zinc plated or galvanized to try to resist any kind of rust. Yeah, I'll show you. I'll just, so I'm adding a total of 8 screws to the 4 that came from the factory, and that should make this fan shroud never pop off or warp again, and kill my fan motor and or wake up the whole neighborhood because it sounds like a machine gun. So got my drill, and what I'm doing is I'm piloting from the back side through to the front or to the top, so that I've got my I don't have to guess where to drill the self-tapping screw. I want it to land right in this factory mount here, the factory hole. And use a very, very small drill bit. I'm using a 5/64 inch drill bit. Obviously you want your drill bit to be smaller than your self-tapping screw is. You want your self-tapping screw to actually tap the hole so it's the perfect size to grip tightly. Okay, now I'm gonna create my own hole in between that factory mount I just drilled and the next one that came, the factory screw. So I'm gonna try to be right about in the middle. Doesn't have to be perfect science. And don't drill too close to the edge. And even though they're self-tapping screws this way, everything lines up. I don't have to worry about, it tapping through the metal and then not tapping the plastic shroud quick enough where it could cause a warp or something like that. So then you just go from the other side, find your holes. And put them in. There goes one. Can you zoom in right here? There we go. Okay. And I'll just keep doing that until I get all of them in. Also, when you're putting your fan housing back on, make sure you get your wires in this slot here. Don't get them pinched. If you get them pinched, the vibrations over time will cut through the wire and you'll have a bigger problem on your hand for sure. All right. Alright, so I've gone ahead and put my equipment disconnect back in. I've also bolted the fan housing, the top of the outdoor unit back on. All these bolts here are back on. When you put your equipment disconnect back in, before you turn the system on, make sure you put it back in the right way. Alright, a lot of these, if you flip them, it's in the off position. So look at your disconnect, make sure that your system, if it's one of the types that is reversible for on or off, make sure you put it in the on position. You see mine says right here on, and then down here it says off, but it's actually blocked because of the position or the orientation this disconnect is in. If I were to flip it upside down, it would go back in, but then you would be able to read off down here, and up here it would be blocking the on lettering. Okay, so I put my disconnect back in. All right, and I'm about to fire it back up, but just to kind of show you the finished product. So you see I added a lot more fasteners here to the top to hold the fan shroud plastic baffle piece in place to keep it from warping. And even just looking at my blades, I'll show you a picture of how they looked before I did this repair. But there's a lot of space between them and the shroud housing, so I think this is going to be a great fix here. Okay, just fired the system up and it's running. Beautiful clearances between the fan blades themselves and the shroud. Nice and quiet the way it should be. Hopefully this video helped.